Never a dull moment. Happy New Year. First of all, um, yeah, we're just gonna go ahead and get started here. What a day! You're gonna watch me send a tweet. That's a very good way to start any broadcast. Is for me to send a tweet, isn't it? But welcome to the Athletics Reaction Show. Breaking news coming from the U.S. Men's National Team at the start of January 2023. New year coming off of the World Cup round of 16 appearance, lost of course to the Netherlands. And so there had been questions about the future of Greg Berhalter ever since that tournament ended. Frankly, since before the tournament began, it was unclear whether or not he would be looked at to take the helm for a second cycle. Then we've had a lot of news come out over the last few weeks, as I think a lot of us were trying to kind of catch our breath before we get into the MLS offseason and then the January window, which every transfer window is increasingly American these days with all the young players who are up and coming and being sold throughout Europe and MLS and beyond. But now, of course, we have the latest and first reported by ESPN and now also confirmed by The Athletic. We do have some reporting that's fresh from Paul Tenorio regarding a blackmail case towards head coach Greg Berhalter, in which Berhalter and his wife Rosalind yesterday had to put out a statement clarifying the record, saying that when they were 18 years old, they had a heated argument outside of a bar while they were in college. Berhalter kicked her legs, essentially. They broke up over it. They reconciled over it months later. Their families were fully aware. They worked through it together. They're married to this day. However, someone was holding that over Berhalter's head as a potential cause to blackmail, texting people at US Soccer, trying to make them aware of the case and everything that was going on. And today it has come out, again, first reported by ESPN, confirmed by Paul Tenorio of The Athletic, with an independent separate report, which had been in the works, that it was Claudio Reyna, or the Reyna family, I guess, as a whole, who was the bug in the ear of U.S. Soccer, letting them know about these infractions. Now, there's some important details here to keep in mind. There are statements, which I will read to you in full, which Paul Tenorio did collect. I'm reading this. I'm doing a dry read for the first time, which is something I haven't really done since college. So bear with me here. I know that this is a very bizarre format for a show here, but it's a very bizarre saga. Look, I'm not a parent, but I don't think that there are any parenting books that suggest, hey, if you used to captain a soccer team and your kid isn't playing for it as much as you want, blackmail the coach. That's where we're at right now. So what we do have is that Rosalind Berhalter, now Berhalter, was roommates with Claudio Reyna's wife, Giovanni Reyna's mother, Danielle. Danielle and Claudio have each provided statements to The Athletic, and I will read those. First, Danielle's statement, which appears first in the piece, which will be tweeted out from my account as well as The Athletic's Twitter account if it isn't yet. Quote from Danielle Reyna: "To set the record straight, I did call U.S. Soccer sporting director Ernie Stewart on December 11th, just after the news broke that Greg had made negative statements about my son Gio at a leadership conference." If you'll recall, by the way, this is an aside, this isn't a quote. In a week following the World Cup, Greg Berhalter was speaking at a leadership conference, did not clarify on-record, off-record status, which is something that does need to be done in advance. Just a little bit of journalism 101 stuff. It's not granted. If you just say off-record, it's not like pleading the fifth where you just get out of jail free or whatever. You do have to get that in agreement. So statements came out where Berhalter spoke, not using Giovanni Reyna's name, about the reasons why a player was not being played, and then some frustrations in the camp and a player needing to apologize to the team, stuff that was unsavory that did not make Giovanni Reyna look good on the back of not playing much at this World Cup, being limited to only 52 minutes. That's the context, right? Back to Danielle Reyna's statement. "I have known Ernie Stewart for years and consider him to be a close friend. I wanted to let him know that I was absolutely outraged and devastated that Gio had been put in such a terrible position," again, likely speaking about the conference and the negative statements more than the playing time itself, "and that I felt very personally betrayed by the actions of someone, Greg Berhalter, my family had considered a friend for decades. As part of that conversation, I told Ernie that I thought it was especially unfair that Gio, who had apologized for acting immaturely about his playing time, was still being dragged through the mud when Greg had asked for and received forgiveness for doing something so much worse at the same age. Without going into detail, the statements from yesterday significantly minimize the abuse on the night in question. Rosalind Berhalter was my roommate, teammate, and best friend, and I supported her through the trauma that followed. It took a long time for me to forgive and accept Greg afterward. but I worked hard to give him grace and ultimately made both of them and their kids a huge part of my family's life. I would have wanted and expected him to give the same grace to Gio. That is why the current situation is so very hurtful and hard. The statement continues. At the time I called Ernie Stewart, many people were trashing Gio Reyna on social media due to Greg's comments, and I didn't know when or if this would stop. I just wanted Ernie to help make sure that there would be no further unwarranted attacks on my son. I thought our conversation would remain in confidence, and it didn't occur to me at the time that anything I said could lead to an investigation. I'm not criticizing Ernie here. I very much commend the recent efforts of U.S. Soccer to address abuse of women players, and I understand now he had an obligation to investigate what I shared. But I want to be very clear that I did not ask for Greg to be fired. I did not make any threats, and I don't know anything about blackmail attempts, nor have I ever had any discussions about anyone on Greg's staff. I don't know any of the other coaches. I did not communicate with anyone in U.S. Soccer about this matter before December 11th, and no one else in my family has made any statements to U.S. Soccer regarding Greg's past at all. I'm sorry this information has become public, and I regret that I played a role in something that could reopen wounds from the past. We have a shorter statement from Claudio Reyna, who is currently the sporting director and the chief of soccer operations for Austin FC in Major League Soccer. I support my wife Danielle and her statement. I too was upset by Greg's comments about Gio after the U.S. was out of the World Cup. And I also appealed to Ernie Stewart on December 11th, asking him to prevent any additional comments. While in Qatar, I shared my frustrations about my son's World Cup experience with a number of close friends. Ernie and Brian McBride, who also works for U.S. Soccer as an executive now, former teammate from the U.S. men's national team, among them. To repeat, while in Qatar, I shared my frustration about my son's World Cup experience with a number of close friends, Ernie and Brian McBride among them. However, at no time did I ever threaten anyone, nor would I ever do so. Some additional context here on the men involved here, as we've already talked about Rosalind and Danielle. Greg Berhalter and Claudio Reyna were teammates, played on World Cup rosters together. Claudio's father, Miguel, coached their club team, and the two played high school soccer together at St. Benedict's in Newark, New Jersey. They also played together at the 2002 World Cup. Reyna was the best man at Berhalter's wedding, according to the U.S. National Soccer Team Players Association, which is a website that is run to represent the players and to speak about U.S. soccer players. I actually used to freelance for that publication. So that's a lot. That's a lot to take in. And I think that just, again, first of all, it's what does this mean in a lot of different ways? I think that for the most immediate factor is that there is a January camp that the U.S. men's national team will play. Current U.S. assistant, former New Zealand head coach, and former Colorado Rapids head coach, Anthony Hudson, will lead that camp. Anthony is someone who would be familiar with the current tactical ideology. I don't see this as a potential, cluing in that Berhalter is automatically on the way out, nor do I think it's automatically proof that he is sticking around. I think that, appointing a current assistant has been done in the past. Look at Dave Sarachan 4 years prior when Bruce Arena had to resign after the team missed the World Cup in 2018 before they had hired Greg Berhalter as his replacement. Dave Sarachan led the program for a year and a half. He had been an assistant under Arena, and he just steadied the ship and continued things as usual with a similar tactical ideology to what the players had been used to from the previous cycle. That's more important now than it was when we were rebuilding the entire program again from scratch, essentially in 2017, with a lot of holdover players who were gone. And essentially Christian Pulisic was the one main holdover in the pool from the previous qualifying cycle. So different circumstances there. No one in American soccer 4 years ago, 2 years ago, would have predicted Anthony Hudson would ever lead the U.S. men's national team on even an interim basis. Yet here we are. And somehow it's the least interesting thing that's coming out from all of this thing. It's an interim coach. It's a January camp with friendlies. Again, it's a placeholder while U.S. Soccer figures out what they're doing with both Greg Berhalter and then the head coaching position, if it's not Berhalter's, to retain. For Berhalter, I mean, it's look on a human level, and I think that that's something that we really need to bring back into the forefront of all of this, because I think that so often when we talk about sports, it's a commodity, it's entertainment. We're talking about it like we're talking about characters in a show, in a movie, in a podcast. We're not necessarily talking about the humans who are involved in this, very real humans. And this is something that we've unfortunately really had to kind of grapple with over the last 5-6 days with Damar Hamlin having that really scary, collapse for the Buffalo Bills over the weekend as well. They're people. There are real emotions that factor into this. Well, it's easy to question the wisdom of blackmailing a former national team program, which Claudio and Danielle would be so familiar with. It's also worth keeping in mind parents watching their young, promising kids get dragged through the mud publicly. It's an emotional thing. It is going to lead to an emotional reaction. There's going to be some protectiveness that comes out. There's going to be some looking out for your own kid, and ultimately at the end of the day, family has to go above soccer. So that context is worth keeping in mind here as to why this would happen. On Berhalter's side, reliving, an incident that was decades old. That's something that you and your wife worked through. It's a very tough situation for Rosalind to be in. From my perspective, I think that it's bringing out what was clearly, no matter how much of the context of the pain that she felt after the domestic incident when they were 18 years old, all of that is resurfacing. And it's not just resurfacing in hey, a friend heard about this and they're calling you about it, and now you have to talk about this is how we worked through it. It's public. It's insanely public. This was one of the biggest coach-player storylines of the entire World Cup for any national team. And now it just so happens to be bringing out something that had happened to you when you were in college. Incredibly difficult situation for her. Not one that anyone should really ever, hope to be in, frankly, or expect to be in. And so it's tough. It's a very tough situation from a human perspective on that front too. So sympathy goes out in that respect as well. For Greg Berhalter, of course, yes, there are work ramifications. What does this mean for his future with U.S. soccer? Does this make him look any less appealing if he did leave U.S. soccer and he was going to go look at a club or another national team, I suppose? Giovanni Reyna, what is, again, there's no indication that Giovanni Reyna was the one sending texts, obviously. And now Danielle has given a statement confirming that. But what is this going to mean for his future? Whether it's Berhalter, the next coach, it's going to be difficult, I think, to fully look past a lot of the drama that's come out through this entire saga. Christian Roldan hardly played at the World Cup. Luca De La Torre didn't play at the World Cup, and it didn't come with the same sort of effect. And granted, neither of them are the same player, the same sort of wonder kid sort of prospect that everyone in world soccer has been tracking like Giovanni Reyna is. Make no mistake about that. But at the same point, they were part of the team. They were played as much, if not less. And they didn't come with this sort of chaos around them, this sort of drama around them. And so I think that that's going to be a question for U.S. soccer to figure out, whether it's, again, Berhalter or whoever his successor would be on the touchline to figure out. But on the club side as well, how does this impact his transfer value? How does this impact how much clubs are going to want to bring him in? Are they going to look and start asking questions about whether or not there's wisdom in signing a player whose family has now had a very public incident on the global stage play out in full? Tricky situation for everybody involved. I'm not sure that there are any clear pathways to resolution, frankly, as I'm looking at it right now. I think that this is more than just a Sirius XM radio apology, right? From anyone involved in this. And candidly, it's just kind of sad to see play out in the way that it is playing out right now. I don't know. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack with this. There's a lot that obviously has gone on. Again, first reported by ESPN and then confirmed independently with separate independent statements from Claudio and Danielle Reyna by Paul Tenorio of The Athletic, which you can now read, of course, on our page. U.S. Soccer also issued a statement on Tuesday at the same time as Berhalter put out his 2-page iPhone note, essentially explaining, his account of the night in question when he was 18 years old. Again, U.S. Soccer statement yesterday said that they hired an outside firm to conduct an independent investigation into the matter. It remains ongoing. During the investigation, U.S. Soccer learned about potential inappropriate behavior towards multiple members of our staff by individuals outside of our organization. We take such behavior seriously and have expanded our investigation to include those allegations. While a spokesperson for U.S. Soccer declined to comment for Paul Tenorio's report, which came out within the last 10-20 minutes, they cited the ongoing investigation, which is usually a strong indication that the other factors which they discovered, which broaden the scope of this all, likely involve that. So serious friction, of course, absolutely. again, Giovanni Reyna, after the comments were made public from that leadership symposium, Reyna had posted on his Instagram that he let his emotions get the best of him and it affected his training and behavior. Quote, "I am disappointed that there's continuing coverage of this matter," parentheses, "as well as some highly fictionalized versions of events," close parenthetical, "and extremely surprised that anyone on the U.S. men's team staff would contribute to it. Coach Berhalter has always said that issues that arise within the team will stay, quote, in-house so we can focus on team unity and progress. I love my team. I love representing my country, and I'm focusing now only on improving and growing as a soccer player and as a person. I hope that going forward, each person involved in U.S. soccer focuses only on what is in the best interest in the men's national team so we can enjoy great success at the World Cup in 2026. Now, that looks a little different. I will say, after everything we learned, that sort of, I hope that everyone pulls in the same direction towards 2026, towards quarterfinal, semifinal, final, whatever, when the World Cup is in the U.S., Mexico, and Canada. That looks very different now when you do have that sort of revelation of who was doing this blackmailing. That's tense. That's an unfortunate situation for any of them to be in, for Giovanni to be in, certainly. With all of this going on around him, it does color his character, just by proxy, just by association. I think that sometimes the company you keep is as important as the person you are. And I think that is something that is going to be very important moving forward here as we look at his young career, as we look at his future with the national team and with Borussia Dortmund and any other club moving forward. It's going to be very important to see what's going on here. So, it looks like we have a couple of commenters on here who are all, it's a mess. It's an absolute mess. Absolutely every single way. What else is there really to, I think that at this point it's a question now of what comes next. Is it going to be, how long does this investigation play out? January camp is already settled. Of course, there's not going to be either Greg Berhalter or a permanent replacement leading that camp. So there is some time on that front. That is not going to be the big storyline to follow in the short term, I would imagine. And you would also think with a January camp, you generally don't see the full first choice national team get called in. So whether or not Gio was going to be on that roster anyway, pretty much a moot point in terms of gauging what his future will be with that program. But everything else is at play at this point. There's still developments that will be coming in. Of course, those will be updated. Those updates will come on The Athletic, as well as everywhere else. I don't think that you're going to have a hard time throwing a stone and finding someone who wants to talk about this one. So, I think that the only other thing that is really worth mentioning here, twofold. One, incidents like the one, even the account that Berhalter, even the way that he characterized it, have no place in society. I think that, growth is obviously a very important factor here, but it does need to be said that just in general, the incident that stems from all this thing is not minor. It's not something that's insignificant, and it is something that does need to be taken with a great level of credibility, especially when both Greg and Rosalind have already talked about it with such definitive clarity and aren't saying that something may or may not have happened. So keep that in mind. Second of all, I do think that there is something that should be highlighted here, and I'm losing my train of thought because I'm getting messages and comments coming in, of course. But I think that there's going to be some questions about what comes next for Claudio Reyna as well, because I think that there will be ramifications, just even if it's in terms of public image and appearance. Austin FC announced that they signed a center back today, from Finland. That's great. But there's going to be a lot more that Austin FC will need to decide in terms of Claudio Reyna's current reputation, his ability to do his job without any sort of distraction, his ability to keep clear eyes. Maybe this is a year where he needs a sabbatical. Maybe this is a year where they decide to move on, whatever the case is. But I do think that this is going to be an instance where, whether he was, as, he and his wife are saying, he was not leading the forefront of this, which is, I think, how ESPN's report characterized that. It was Claudio Reyna who, put in the report, the report, which was then skewed as blackmail. What comes next on that front, of course, it also remains to be seen. I think that there's nothing but the unknown at this point. This is not a situation that has happened in the past with U.S. soccer to such an extent, certainly not on the men's side, while there's been this much attention on the men's national team program over the last 20, 25 years or so. There has not been this same sort of, frankly, just a fully off-field drama with very minimal on-field implications, aside from, of course, the misutilization of Giovanni Reyna perceived, as well as the more so, again, off-field, though, the comments about why he was not playing in the first place, which do touch on on-field topics, but they are, at the end of the day, off-field matters still. So this is new territory for U.S. soccer. This is something that U.S. soccer has not really had to deal with in the past, not nearly to this sort of magnitude. So how they handle this, what goes on, will be very, very interesting, and certainly something worth following here. So I think that's going to do it for me here. We've been going for 20 minutes strong. Go ahead and check The Athletic out, of course. Keep following if you don't follow this account already. If you're watching this on Twitter, please make sure to follow it. You will get more updates. I've already seen a handful of tweets go out since we started this, and we'll be able to keep on going from there. So thank you, everyone, for watching. Big day for U.S. soccer, U.S. men's national team news, and it doesn't look like it's going to be resolved anytime soon. So thanks for watching, and I'm sure we'll be back at some point.